What's up, guys? Today I got episode 5 of the Puckpedia Mock GM Offseason series. Episode 5 is on the Carolina Hurricanes. So I know for their offseason, a lot of the fans really want them to go for Mitch Marner, big ticket free agent. And I mean, they have the cap space to do it. Going into the offseason, it looks like they have about 28 million in cap space for this upcoming season, which would be more than enough money to get Marner and still fill the other holes that they have, especially considering that most of their lineup is going to be the same as it was last year. I think the only guys who are really leaving are Brent Burns. That's all I can really think of off the top of my head. I think I'm missing someone else, but either way, though, I mean, I think bringing in Marner, obviously, it's not going to hurt the team, but you also, you got to take into consideration that he is a right winger, and you do have a pretty deep right side. You already have Jarvis playing on the first line, and then you got young guys like Blake and Stankoven that are coming up. And I think getting Marner, especially for like a 7-year deal, like, you kind of just plug that hole and then limit these other guys. Because he'd have to play first line. I mean, you could play Jarvis on the left on the first line, but it kind of makes me think of when the Penguins got Drum and Ginla in like 2014 at the deadline or 2013, and played him on his offside, and it just never really worked. So you just have to be careful about a situation like that if that's the way you try to go. But so I think where I'm going to start here with this roster is I'm going to try and re-sign some of the younger guys. So I'm going to extend Blake. So looking at these analytics, he plays like he's worth $6 million. Just to clarify, these cards are made by Dom Lucinshin of the Athletic. These don't like aren't meant to show what a player should be paid, what his contract should be. It's not showing that. It's more the value of which he's playing at. So this past season, analytically, he played like a $6 million player. That doesn't mean he's a guy worth $6 million quite yet. I'm sure he'll be worth way more than that, once he gets into his prime and gets a few seasons under his belt. But right now, I mean, looking at AFP analytics, extension projections, they have him, if he were to sign long term, they'd have him at 7 mil for 7 years, and shorter term would be 4 mil for 2 years. Even then, I think that might be a little excessive, just because I don't even know if he really played this whole season. So what I think is a good mutual agreement for both sides is 2 years at 3.5 mil. I think that's pretty fair. I just feel like the 4 mil is a little too much for a guy who's relatively unproven. But then based off what I'm about to give Stankoven here, you might find that a little hypocritical. I guess he's not in the Central Division one. So Stankoven, $4 million player. His offseason projection is, let's see, long term 7 mil for 6 years, short term 4 mil for 3 years. I'm gonna give him like 5 mil for 4 years. I think that's a good kind of medium between the two. I don't think that 4.2 mil really represents what he's worth. I think his numbers probably tanked a little bit from getting traded midseason and having to adapt to a new team and a new system. But I think kind of signing him to like a bridge type deal like this would be worth it. Maybe he'd want a little bit more money. You can give him 5.5 mil for 4 years, just to make sure that you lock him up. But those are two big extensions I think Carolina should get out of the way this offseason as soon as possible. Because, if you don't do it this offseason and you kind of wait into next season, I think these are two guys who are really good players and are going to be really good players for a long time. And because of that, I think their value is only going to go up as they keep playing, especially at the NHL level. So the more they keep playing, the more their value is going to go up. So the more value you get if you're the Hurricanes and it's paying them now, versus having to pay them more like mid-season. So I say get those out the way now. Both good, fair deals that lock them up for at least a few years, and then kind of bridge them into their bigger deals. And you'll probably have some more cap space by then, with Kotkaniemi, Svechnikov coming off the books. So yeah, and then you can pay them what they're really worth once they're worth it. Other than that, though, I mean, there's not really any other extensions that I feel rushed to do. I think with Moro and Nikishin, you could extend them, but I think just because their sample sizes aren't big enough, I think you kind of let them play, just to kind of gauge how much they're worth. Because you risk, I mean, if you pay them now, if you sign them to like bridge deals or whatever, you'll have to pay them a sizable amount of money just because of their pedigree as prospects. But I think if you wait and play it out, because if you sign those deals now, you risk that they're not worth it, that they don't live up to it. So I think giving them more time at the NHL level, getting a bigger sample size, leading into the beginning of next year, and then signing them maybe midway through the year or at the end, or even just qualifying them as RFAs. I mean, honestly, but these are two guys you would want to lock up. I just don't think you do it now. I think you wait a little bit, you see how they perform in full time roles next year, and then go from there. So the only real major hole still left in this lineup after all that is at the left wing and the 2C, the left wing one and the second center. So in order to address left wing one, I mean, again, I know Canes fans want Marner, but I'm gonna go with Nikolai Ehlers. Um, his player card says he's worth $9.5 million, and his his pro, his projected contract is 8 mil for 6 years. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there between the 9.5 mil and the 8 mil. So I'm kind of just going to go right in the middle of that. I think he's going to sign for 7 years, maybe 6 years, just because he is 29 already, and signing for 7 years would be a little bit too much. Maybe if you pay him more money, you do shorter term. If you pay on the higher side of these two at around 9.5, maybe even 10 mil, you go shorter term. I think if you're getting him for like 8 mil, it's 8.5 mil, which is what I'm actually going to put him as, 8.5 mil. I think he goes for around there. I think that'll be about 6 years until he's 35. Um, so I think that's good. And by the time he's 35, I don't know if he'll be worth all that. But as long as you can get some good years out of him, that's all that really matters for the Canes. Because they're in win now mode. So who cares what he's worth in a few years when your window's closed? And that still leaves them with 20 million cap space too. So you could literally pay him more than that if you really want to. And if the GM believes that that's the right move for the team. But in order to address the 2C position, I mean, I made this trade board of just guys who I've kind of seen floating around in rumors, as well as UFAs down here. But there's a lot of interesting names at center that you could bring in to be the 2C. I think obviously they want Marco Rossi because he's a young guy who's proven he can put up second line center numbers, and they have the assets they could trade for him. I just think he's probably going to go somewhere else. I don't think he'll go to the Canes, and also I think it's a little risky if you want to win now. Going for a younger guy like Rossi, who's only like 23 and pretty inexperienced, and you don't realize his full potential yet. I think that's not really what you want to do if you're the Canes, just because you're in win now mode. And I mean, they're kind of on the burner right now. Have some choking allegations that they have to beat. So the guy I'm going to go with is Bo Horvat, because I think the Islanders should start selling, especially with the first overall pick. I think this is the perfect time to kickstart a rebuild that they've needed for years. They've just been kind of marinating in mediocrity and, signing bad contracts and, not really making any progression on the roster. So I think tearing it down, not completely to the studs, but, tearing it down somewhat and getting some assets in return is probably the smart way to go. So I'm going to trade for Bo Horvat. Yes, Carolina can hold his entire cap hit, but I'm going to save, let's say, $2 million. And because they are going to retain $2 million, I think we do have to be a little extra generous with what we give them. So I'm going to give them Joel Nystrom, a defensive prospect, as well as, where is he? Felix Unger Sorstrom. If I can find him, that is. There we go. Felix Unger Sorstrom, Joel Nystrom, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and a first. Whichever first they want, honestly. It could be the Carolina first for this year, or although this is going to be an offseason trade, so this will already have been used or traded. So it's either one of these two picks. I think it's whichever one they think is going to be the lowest, which I think will probably be the Carolina pick. But if you make this trade, and you're able to fill that hole with a guy like Bo Horvat, I think that does make a big difference. So bringing him in as the 2C for this package, I think it's mutually beneficial for both sides. Carolina gets their win now guy, and the Islanders get a bunch of futures. Two good prospects and a first, and Kotkaniemi, who's still relatively young, can maybe bounce back, especially in a less pressure kind of team right now, because no one really expects the Islanders to do all that good. So I think bringing in Bo Horvat for this move, I think this is perfect. But another need of Carolina's is goaltending. Their goaltending is just really iffy, and that's kind of like their biggest inconsistency right now, especially in the playoffs. So I think John Gibson is the perfect trade target for the Canes to go for. At the moment, he's still young enough where he can kind of carry that full-time load by himself, as well as having the support from Kochetkov. And he's not really needed in Anaheim anymore because Lucas Dostal has kind of emerged as the number one there. But I'm still going to send them, even though they have Dostal, I'm going to send Freddie Anderson the other way, send him back to Anaheim. I think at this point in his career, he's 35. He's really injury prone. I think he's a perfect 1A, 1B type of goalie, or even a backup goalie, especially a higher level backup goalie at that. And if Anaheim wants to kind of start climbing out of the rebuild, especially if they get Mitch Marner, I think bringing in a solid backup goalie to, and getting assets for Gibson is kind of ideal for them because you still have a strong goaltending tandem and you get some assets for it too. So I'm going to send them Freddie Anderson and a second and a third. I don't think Gibson's value is too high, so I don't think a trade for him will be anything crazy. I think just something like this will be perfect, and that Anaheim would accept that. I mean, you get some future assets and a good caliber backup goalie. Maybe they'd rather have a prospect than just two mid-round picks or early mid-round picks. But it doesn't really matter what the package is. I don't think it'll be anything crazy, and I think the Canes can easily afford it with all the assets they have. And I just think bringing in Gibson would be a perfect move for them. And if you can't get Gibson, I think you go for Thatcher Demko. I think the asking price for him will be a little bit higher, but I think going for Gibson's perfect. He's only 31 still, so you can still get a few good years out of him, as long as his injuries aren't like lingering issues, which I don't think they're meant to be, but you never really know. But honestly, I'm going to leave the roster at this. I know people want them to go for number one right D to replace Brent Burns. I think Scott Morrow and Nikishin are both ready for full-time roles. So I wouldn't really want to shut them out of the lineup if I'm Carolina. And then the other guys you have signed, like Sean Walker, Chatfield, and Gostisbehere, you have signed for, decent sums of money for, a little bit of term for all of them, at least 2 years for Chatfield and Gostisbehere. And Walker, you still have 3 more years, 4 even. So yeah, honestly, I think you keep it as is. I think this is a solid decor, and if it's not working mid-season, you make a trade for a guy. But if they're not confident in this decor, you still have 14 million in cap space to spend, and you need a right D. So some guys they could go for on the UFA market. I think they could go for Ekblad, although I don't think he'll go there. They can also bring back Brent Burns, which at his age now, I don't really know if, he still had a pretty good year, right? Like at 40 years old this past season, he was still pretty good. Still PP1 QB, but next season he'll be 41. But if it's a guy that they feel like they could still get more juice out of, I think you absolutely can bring him back, just on like a 1-year deal. Or they could trade for one of these guys. If they do trade for anyone, I think it'll be Erik Karlsson or Rasmus Anderson. But I just don't see the need to do that. They have a ton of assets again that they could trade, and it won't really hurt. But I think you kind of give this decor a run as is. Maybe you can bring in a guy to be a 7th defenseman, just to kind of support the other 6. But I don't think you go big game hunting on a right defenseman, unless they really, really feel like they need to, which they could. And it wouldn't surprise me if they do. But I think you could leave this as is. Let the young guys kind of come in and show that they, can play on this in this lineup on a competitive team. And if they can't, then you go out and you address that need. But I think that's kind of up to management to decide what they want to do there. That could go 50-50 either way. So most likely option is I think Brent Burns will come back for one more year. I think if he was going to retire, he would have announced his retirement already. But you never know. Guys have done it later, so in the middle of the offseason. So we'll see. It also depends if the Canes give him a comeback offer, because if they don't, he'll probably just retire. But if they do, then that'll probably make his decision a little bit harder. But we'll see what happens with that. Anyways, I know this video is pretty minimal moves for the Hurricanes, but I just think their roster is already well built. There's just a few more supporting pieces needed, and they do have the cap space to do it. So with those extensions that we signed for Stankoven and Blake, plus the moves we made in free agency and the guys we acquired via trade, we still have 18 million cap space for next year. Or the Canes still have 18 million cap space for next year on top of the 14 mil that they have this year. And this roster would pretty much look the same. Next year, they'll have a few depth guys that they'll have to make decisions on, like Jankowski, and they'll have to pay Nikishin and Morrow. But other than that, there won't be anything crazy that they'd have to do. So this team would probably look the same for like the next 2 years. But I think this is a roster that could 100%, make a deep run to the finals. I think finally get them over that hump of, one win in like the last 17 conference finals games, which is crazy. But I look at this roster and I think, this team is definitely a team that's capable of doing it, barring any major injuries or, any random things that could happen that could affect the team's season. I mean, crazier things have happened, like this past year with the Rangers and the Canucks. Like, you never know. But I think this would be a pretty ideal offseason for the Hurricanes. It addresses their needs. You get your center to your 2C, you get a better starting goalie, and you get some more top six guys. Bringing in Marner, I think, wouldn't be your smart move. I think that would be more of a desperation move. I also know that it was reported that like Carolina was like one of the few teams on Marner's list, but what I don't understand is if it was, then why would he have denied a trade there at the deadline? Maybe it's because he wanted to have one last run in Toronto and give it one more shot, and maybe in hopes of re-signing there, which I would get because, I know he's from there and all that, but maybe that's why he didn't waive his clause to go to Carolina, but it's also maybe he didn't want to go there. But I know now it's been reported that it's one of his few teams on his list that he'd really want to go to. But I just think bringing Ehlers is a better fit and, cheaper, and still kind of fills that same need. Plus, he definitely offers more scoring, which I think the Canes could probably use a bit more of in their top six, not more playmaking, because I think they already have a good amount of that. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know in the comments what you think about these moves. I'm also going to link the Puckpedia roster in the description, so feel free to go and comment directly on the roster. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.